Her jaw clenched in rage, Marla Carew leaned over the shoulder of her assistant, Complum, who was manning the science station on the bridge of the Darzor. She watched the curious sensor readings from Aluna scroll across the screen. What in the divine are those crazy Klingons doing down there? Captain Uzel stepped to her side. They must be fighting something on the planet. Perhaps the creatures they've been telling us about. Marla turned to the captain in confusion. Creatures? The only ones down there are... She stopped, because she was about to say that Curate Molofson and his followers were already living on Aluna, but that was a secret she had vowed to keep. Captain Uzel eyed his leader with mild disapproval. Haven't you been reading the dispatches from Starfleet? These Genesis planets are dangerous places. Marla scowled. That's our home you're talking about. But we've got so much left to do. Not only do we have to stabilize those satellites and get them back into orbit, but we've got to get the replicators on every ship making parts for the transporter booths. Have you seen the prototype? Uzel shook his head. That's one thing I haven't had time for. But Regent, I urge you to read the dispatches from Starfleet. For one thing, they're sending us an expert on Genesis planets. Marla Carew furrowed all 6 of her eyebrows. Oh, now they send us experts. First the wave, and then someone to explain it? After our 8 million survivors are safe, I'll listen to their experts and their excuses. Marla headed for the doorway at the rear of the bridge, and Captain Uzel called after her. Where are you going, Regent? Down to the planet to see what the Klingons are doing. Regent Carew, the Klingons said that everyone going to the planet must wear an environmental suit. Marla sniffed with disdain. They don't sound as brave as they're made out to be. Halfway to the transporter room, Cirrus Genosset stepped from a doorway and moved in front of Marla. Regent Carew, may I have a word with you? Marla tried to slip past her. I'm very busy. The Cirrus mustered her considerable charm. The Overseer is not well, and I'm worried about him. You know, if he dies, one of my other husbands will become Overseer, and they could rescind the decree making you Regent. Surely you can spare a few moments for your benefactor's wife. For your lover's wife. Marla tried to keep a composed expression on her face, but she must have failed because the Cirrus smiled in triumph. Oh, you didn't think I knew about that? I did. I chose not to bring it up at your heresy trial because we had so much other evidence against you. Marla glanced around to see if anyone had overheard, then she pointed down the corridor. I'm headed to the transporter room. We'll ask the operator to leave. Then we can talk there. A few moments later, they entered the transporter room, and Marla dismissed the transport operator. As the door whooshed shut, Cirrus Genosset turned to the Regent and crossed her arms. First of all, what has happened to us is bad enough without completely overturning the order of our society as well. What we need is to get back to normal as soon as we can. Normal, Cirrus? You haven't been down to Aluna to see what it's like, have you? Marla Carew moved toward the transporter console and pointed to the platform. Go stand over there. We're going down to the planet to see what our Klingon friends have been doing. Genosset looked at her in horror, tugging at her elegant scarlet gown. I'm not dressed for it. Marla smiled. You will be an inspiration to the Klingon warriors. Go ahead, get on the platform. Hesitantly, Cirrus Genosset stepped onto the transporter pad, and Marla Carew fought the temptation to scatter her molecules into the stratosphere. She entered the coordinates and strode over to the platform and took her place beside the Cirrus, who was trembling. Freezing, foul-smelling wind assaulted them as they materialized on the planet's surface in the middle of a snowy blizzard, with immense trees shaking all around them. Within seconds, they were surrounded by towering figures, armored from head to toe and carrying disruptor rifles. Who goes there? Marla drew herself up imperiously to answer. The rulers of this planet. Is Ambassador Worf here? You must wear headgear and environmental suits, or we will transport you to the Dog J and put you in quarantine in our brig. There is a dangerous fungus on this planet which can affect your mind. I want to see Ambassador Worf.
I am Worf.
Worf's underling returned with suits and headgear and handed them to the women. Because she was cold, Marla didn't argue any more as she pulled on the overly large protective gear. Her teeth chattering, Genesect was even quicker to obey their orders. Worf was still furious at them.
Haven't you read our dispatches? The Genesis wave also brought invaders to this planet. They killed 7 of our officers and wounded 15 others.
Worf picked up a handful of moss from the ground and held it out to the women.
They can take on the form of persons known to you, which is why they are so dangerous.
Marla waved off his explanation.
Our main concern are the people stored in our transporter satellites. We have to start setting up transporter stations and beaming them down immediately.
Worf held his ground.
That is impossible. We have no idea how many of these creatures there are. There may be millions of them. I can't guarantee your people's safety.
Neither can I, Ambassador. But down here, they've got a fighting chance. Up there, they've got no chance at all if the computers fail.
The big Klingon considered her request for a moment, then nodded.
Very well. We will speed up our timetable. We'll start erecting shelters, and you can erect the transporter platforms you need. By daylight, we should be ready. But don't leave this clearing.
Worf motioned to his comrades, and the Klingons dispersed, going back to their grim business. Marla turned to look at Cirrus Genesect, whose stunned face was barely visible behind the visor in her helmet. Marla wasn't sure, but she thought she saw tears in the pale eyes of the Cirrus.
Rest assured, Cirrus. We'll change Aluna back to the paradise it was. Let's go back to the ship.
Overseer Tajaret tossed fitfully in his sleep in the royal stateroom aboard the Darzor. By leaving all the decisions up to Marla Carew, he had turned his back on countless millions of lives, because he was too cowardly to make the tough choices himself. Shivering with the sweat of guilt and remorse, Tajaret reached across his bed for Genesect, but his wife was no longer there. He knew he could get out of bed and roam the corridors of the ship like a ghost, but what good would that do? Who wanted to see him, the ghost of a former ruler? They didn't need him anymore. Suddenly, he heard a soft, feminine voice coming from the comm panel outside his door.
Open your door and turn out the lights.
He reached to touch the panel on the table at his bedside. A curvaceous figure shrouded in flowing silk padded into the room. He recognized the perfume as Genesect's, and he breathed a sigh of relief.
My darling, I need you so badly.
Her barely clad figure slithered into his arms.
I know. Kiss me, my overseer.
Eagerly seeking a measure of forgetfulness, Tajaret touched her supple lips with his own. She tasted oddly bitter, not like before, but he momentarily lost himself in their mutual passion. Then his chest began to constrict, as if he had been running too fast, too far. As he began to cough and gag, his lover pulled away from him and left him grasping for both her body and the air. Then he seemed to hear a babble of voices from all those millions of subjects he had abandoned to their fate, and they welcomed him to the grip of the divine hand. As the door of his stateroom whooshed open and a shadow slipped out, the vaunted overseer of Aluna, who had ruled for 3 generations of peace and prosperity, collapsed in his bed and died. Alexander cringed when he saw his brother Jeremy lying in a sickbay bed aboard the Dog J. The burns on his face and body were very serious, although no longer life-threatening. Jeremy looked up at his brother and tried to smile. They burned off all my nice blonde hair. The girls back home are going to be disappointed. I heard you're going to see home very soon. The young human grunted. I don't want to, but a Starfleet runabout is dumping someone off here and taking me back. Come on, Jeremy. You know you'll get better treatment at Starfleet Medical. Nobody ever accused Klingons of being great healers. Ah, yeah, I know. They keep asking me why I don't have 2 or 3 of every organ like you do. Alexander laughed and changed the subject. Well, we now have reinforcements on the planet. So Dad sent a big force to march from Base 2 to Base 1. Now that we're using just bladed weapons, we've had a lot fewer casualties. We need to establish a bigger perimeter and enlarge the 2 camps because the Ilunans want to start bringing their people down. Jeremy mustered a pained smile. Is Dad coming to visit me? He's meeting the specialist Starfleet is sending us, so he'll be there to see you off. Alexander stepped away from the bed and wound his way through the crowded sickbay and into the corridor, where he was met by a shuttlecraft pilot. Alexander Rozhenko, you are to report to the Ilunan vessel Darzor. They have requested a Klingon representative, and you're the closest and most able, according to Ambassador Worf. Alexander suppressed a smile, amused that his father considered him so capable. "15 minutes later, a Klingon shuttlecraft slid into the shuttle bay of the Darzor, and as Alexander disembarked, he was met by the 2 strong-willed women he had seen the night before. The older, scholarly regent, Marla Carew, and the regal beauty, Cirrus Geneset. Marla scowled at him. "And you are?" "Duty Chief Alexander Rozhenko of the Yavang, son of Worf, House of Martok." "And your father couldn't come?" "My father is busy securing the planet for your people. What is the emergency?" Cirrus Geneset sniffed back a sob, and he noticed that her eyes were red. "My husband, Overseer Tajaret, is dead. We fear he's been murdered." The young Klingon frowned at this revelation, wondering what he could do, when the 2 women immediately pointed at one another and spoke in unison. "She did it!" Alexander held up his hands. "Ladies, what do you want me to do?" "I can explain." Alexander turned to see a handsome Ilunan of middle age and fine clothing come striding toward him. "Excuse me for being late. I had some urgent documents to sign. I am Overseer Padrin. I have succeeded Overseer Tajaret." Padrin gazed pointedly at Marla Carew. "And I have relieved Professor Carew of the title of Regent and assumed her duties and powers." Marla's hands balled into fists. "You can't do this now! You've got to let me finish my work! You're condemning 8 million people to death!" Padrin glared at the former regent. "I am doing no such thing. You can proceed with all the tasks you have to do. But you are a suspect in the Overseer's death." Padrin looked fondly at Cirrus Geneset. "You are also a suspect, my dear. I'm sorry, but you must be confined to quarters until the inquiry is complete." He turned again to Alexander. "This death puts what's left of our government into chaos. I welcome any help you can give us." Alexander's mind worked furiously about what to do. "Can I see the body and the evidence? To understand why you think one of these esteemed ladies murdered Overseer Tajaret?" "Absolutely." Padrin turned to the cadre of uniformed officers behind him and gave them orders. "You 2 constables, accompany the Cirrus to her quarters and make sure she stays there. You 2 accompany Professor Carew to the laboratory and make sure she stays there to do her work." The 2 women and their escorts left the shuttle bay. Remaining behind were Alexander, Overseer Padrin, and a young lad who had accompanied the group. Alexander pointed to the boy. "Who is this?" Padrin explained. "This is Farlow, the Cirrus's 3rd husband. It is typical for our well-bred females to have 3 husbands, and he and Geneset wed on the day we left Iluna." The tow-headed lad smiled at Alexander. "I'm pleased to meet you. I'm just as confused as you are, but I'll help you any way I can." The Klingon smiled back, liking the lad immediately. "Are you the next in line to be Overseer?" Farlow shrugged. "I guess so, but it doesn't look like it's a healthy job to have." It only took a few minutes for them to walk down the main corridor to the stateroom where the Overseer lay dead in his bed. Alexander was struck by the luxury of the furnishings and also the odor of a very opulent perfume. If he wasn't mistaken, it was the same scent that Cirrus Geneset had been wearing in the shuttle bay. An older doctor was near the bedside. Podrin approached him. "Dr. Gerdon, this is Alexander Rozhenko, a representative of the Klingon Empire. He is in charge of our inquiry. Please tell him what you told me." The medical man took a deep breath and consulted a handheld device before answering. "Tijaret was poisoned. There are traces on his lips of Ilzadin, a very fast-acting nerve agent which is often used in large-sized pest eradication. What I couldn't tell from my examination is whether he was poisoned or whether he committed suicide. But there's no trace of Ilzadin in this room. If he administered it himself, what did he do with it? Plus, he had a visitor late last night." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "A visitor? Who?" Overseer Podrin answered. "We don't know, but she was female. One of the ship's passengers saw her in the corridor. The lights were dimmed, and the witness couldn't give us a description, except to say it was a female wearing night clothes. We know that the Overseer and the Cirrus came back here alone for 1 unit of time after dinner, and then the Cirrus and the Regent went down to Aluna. Later, the Cirrus returned to the ship, apparently was alone for some time, then spent the rest of the night with me." Dr. Gerdon added an important observation. "The time of death coincides with the sighting of the woman who was seen coming out of here. She could not have entered unless he opened the door for her, so it must have been somebody he knew." Alexander took a deep breath while he collected his thoughts. "I know very little about your society. But in Klingon society, there is an old tradition of claiming power by murder and violent duels to the death." Podrin looked aghast at the idea. "We have a very orderly transition of power based on bloodlines and DNA. Nobody has to commit murder to claim power. Besides, who would want to be in charge during these troubled times? You benefited, Overseer Podrin, and Regent Carew suffered. Why would you suspect her of murder when she was the first to suffer from his death?" Podrin pursed his lips as if he were hesitant to answer. "Regent Carew and Overseer Tijaret were lovers, and she and Cirrus Geneset were enemies. Owing to that, and many philosophical matters. She and Geneset were seen arguing last night, and the question of returning power to our family was bound to be a problem, no matter what else happened. I thought it was best to remove that friction from the equation. If she really wants to do her work, she can help Alunans without being regent." Alexander nodded. "So you and Geneset got your way?" Podrin shook his head. "Not my way. I was happy being the Cirrus consort. I never wanted this job." Alexander rubbed his eyes, feeling way over his head. He would rather be down on the planet's surface battling those fiendish moss creatures. That thought brought him to a disturbing conclusion. He turned to the white-suited figure of Dr. Gerdon. "Doctor, you need to make sure that no one on this vessel, or any of your ships, has been infected by the fungus we encountered down on the planet. You must test everyone on this ship. It might explain what happened to the Overseer." In the laboratory on the Darzor, Marla Carew tried to forget her anger and grief long enough to concentrate on monitoring the progress of the work crews, rushing to put the satellites back into orbit at the same time that they attempted to stabilize the bioneural networks. She also had to oversee the manufacture of several thousand compact solar-powered transporter booths to be transported to the planet as soon as the Klingons secured a large enough area. Fortunately, slaving at her side was Vilo Garlet, who must have been sent by the Divine, because he was able to fulfill all the development work on the transporters, especially their secret purpose to re-terraform Aluna. At first, Marla was a bit annoyed to see Chandra, the young friend of the new Cirrus consort, working alongside Vilo Garlet. But her colleague trusted the young lady, having saved her life. As the units of time passed, Chandra became more and more of a fixture in the laboratory. Still, Marla made certain never to discuss her secret plans with anyone but Vilo Garlet. She approached Vilo during one break when they were alone. "How is the programming going on the chromosynthesis box?" Garlett nodded wearily. Our flora and fauna will be layered on top of the existing Genesis growth, with results that I can't entirely predict. My main concern is the coverage. We've got to make sure to get one of these transporter boxes at every 100 measures for it to be successful. Since the transporter component is solar-powered and unidirectional, tell the Klingons that we must have complete coverage in order to keep them working around the clock. The next 2 days would be crucial, Marla decided, because they would either prepare the planet to receive the 8 million survivors, or they would lose them all. She glanced at her timepiece and frowned. Starfleet's expert is due to arrive soon. Worf stood in the cavernous shuttle bay of the Dog-J, with both of his sons at his side, waiting for the arrival of a Starfleet runabout. Jeremy lay on an anti-grav gurney that floated at waist level. He was miserable at the prospect of returning home wounded. Standing at the ambassador's other side, Alexander was preoccupied with his new assignment among the Illuminans. While they waited for the arrival of the runabout, Worf and Jeremy listened to Alexander's account of the Overseer's suspected murder. Worf could offer little advice. For a Klingon, the murder of a weak, ineffectual leader sounded like the normal course of events. Stand clear for docking. Out of the hatch of the runabout, an attractive woman stepped forward to meet them. It had been many years since Worf had seen Dr. Leah Brahms, and she looked somewhat older and thinner. She greeted Worf and his sons, holding out her hand to engage in the human custom of the handshake. Pleased to meet you. I've been reading about what you've been going through. But Regent Carew could not be here? Alexander spoke first. I'm afraid not. She's in confinement on an Illunan ship because she's suspected of committing a crime. But she's still leading their rescue efforts. Another crew member hopped out of the runabout. I hate to rush you, but we're on a tight schedule. Jeremy said his goodbyes, and the crewman grabbed the anti-grav gurney and steered it through the hatch into the runabout. Worf then turned to Leah. Since there are no Illunans to meet you, we should beam down to the planet and show you what we're doing. But tell me, Dr. Brahms, what is the Enterprise doing? Admiral Nechayev has sent them on a separate mission. Apparently, there's a portable Genesis device in the hands of some deluded Bajorans. I've asked that the Enterprise be sent here as soon as they're done. Worf shook his head with disbelief. A portable Genesis device. Is there no end to this madness? Make ready for launch! The three of them stepped into the observation area behind the protective force field and watched silently as the runabout cruised into space. Down on a Luna surface, Leah Brahms never thought she would see Klingon gardeners. But there they were, an army of them hacking their way with scythes, batleths, and machetes through the thick, gloomy jungle. As Worf had explained to her, they were only trying to clear a belt of land to allow the Illunans to erect their transporter booths. Even though this strange scene was being repeated in other regions of the planet, the progress still felt too slow to Leah. At this rate, it would take weeks to free all the people in the transporter satellites.
Dr. Brahms?
Leah turned to see Alexander Rozhenko, accompanied by an Illunan female dressed in an environmental suit identical to her own. Alexander introduced Marla Carew, who stepped forward.
They told me, Dr. Brahms, that you were an expert on Genesis. It is a Federation technology, isn't it?
Leah took a deep, calming breath before replying.
We abandoned the Genesis technology 90 years ago. Unfortunately, we didn't protect the secrets of Genesis well enough. These invaders can impersonate close friends and family members if you're not protected from their fungus, and they were able to kidnap the one actual expert we had.
Marla Carew backed off a step and seemed somewhat mollified by this news.
I was infected by the fungus.
Alexander was shocked by this revelation.
You were? Have you received treatment?
Marla nodded.
Yes, I have, and I feel much better. I guess I'm looking to fix blame for this somewhere, and I don't know where.
Leah Brahms smiled grimly.
Welcome to the club. I really came here to see if I could help you with your transporter satellites.
The blood-curdling scream caused the three of them to whirl around and see two Alunan technicians scurrying away from a newly arrived transporter booth. Leah, Alexander, and Marla Carew rushed to see what had happened. The door of the compact transporter booth was open, a wisp of steam curling from the enclosure. When they peered into the blue box, their stomachs heaved. There on the floor of the small transporter platform was a steaming, oozing pile of skin, hair, blood, bones, viscera, and unrecognizable biological matter mixed with fabric and writhing, maggot-like things. Marla tore herself away from the awful sight and slumped against the enclosure.
It's one of my countrymen. Carew to Velo Garlett.
Yes, Professor. I'm here.
Stop transporting from the satellites immediately. Something has gone terribly wrong.
She turned to Alexander.
I'm in your custody. Is it all right if I go back to my ship?
Of course. I'll commandeer a shuttlecraft to take us.
Leah Brahms felt totally helpless, but asked what she could do. Marla suggested she use the Klingon scientific facilities to analyze the problem. Then Marla marched off into a swirling snowstorm toward the shuttlecraft. Back in the laboratory on the Darzor, Marla found that Dr. Gearden and Velo Garlett had just finished examining the aberrant satellite that a Klingon shuttlecraft had dragged back to the laboratory. As Dr. Gearden left, Velo told Marla what they had learned. Dr. Gearden has confirmed my suspicions. The biological components of the satellite, they're infected by the same fungus that's found on the planet. It's one of the satellites you handled personally when we were experimenting. But you mustn't blame yourself, Marla. You didn't know. Marla jumped to her feet and began to pace frantically. The Klingons. Our own work crews. We didn't start to take precautions until a few days ago. We'll never know how many are infected by this fungus until we try to bring the people back. Velo gulped hard. Dr. Gearden has plenty of medicine, and he can treat this. He's already given this unit a preliminary treatment, and we'll keep monitoring it. Marla shook her fist in the air. That damnable Genesis wave! We must kill the alien plants and microbes and put it back the way it was. As soon as the last transporter booth is on the surface of Aluna, I want to start the chromosynthesis process. Velo gaped at her. Before our people are even down? Before we even run a single test? Marla stomped across the laboratory. I won't bring my people to that monstrous inferno. We have it within our power to undo the horrors of the Genesis wave, and we must. If we want to save Aluna, we can't go halfway with any of our measures. Marla Carew stopped pacing and clenched her fist. Tell no one of our plans, but be ready to act as soon as the last box is in place. Velo Garlett bowed. Yes, Professor. The new Aluna has no room for the hereditary monarchy either. You're right, Velo. We'll destroy it. During her odyssey across the Alpha Quadrant, fleeing from or chasing the Genesis wave, Leah Brahms had spent many nights in strange places, from a Klingon bird of prey to the moss creature's home world of Lomar. But she could not recall a more eerie place than Aluna by night. Thick clouds which looked like curdled milk floated eerily over the lush treetops. The Klingons were only now returning from a day spent hacking through the jungle. Perhaps someday this planet would be habitable, even pleasant, but that day seemed a long way off. The ones she felt sorriest for were the refugees sitting by the lonely campfires. They were alive, but their planet and civilization were dead. She looked up to see a hulking Klingon in an environmental suit, wearily holding a bat'leth at his side.
Hello, Worf. How goes the war?
Tiring. The plants here grow like a targ's mane.
He looked around and noted the gloomy Alunans.
I see some natives have returned.
Yes, They were beaming them down quickly until one of them got mangled in the transporter. I would guess that the bioneural network in the satellite was infected by the fungus.
Then Leah Brahms lifted her eyes to Worf's with a question.
Worf, did we arrive too late?
He shrugged his beefy shoulders and didn't give her an answer. On the bridge of the Enterprise, Data, who was at the ops console, glanced in the direction of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. "Sir, I am receiving a hail from Admiral Nechayev on the runabout Javlik. She wishes to address the entire bridge crew." "Very well. On screen." Picard was relieved to see that on the view screen, Nechayev was her pinched-faced, stiff-backed self.
"Hello, Captain Picard, Commander Riker, and the rest of you. One of the planets devastated by the Genesis wave was Aluna, a non-aligned world that has always been cordial to the Federation, but I don't think they hold much love for us now. They're in a desperate situation because they've got 8 million people stored in a network of transporter satellites, and they're battling to reclaim a world overrun with moss creatures and everything else endemic to a Genesis planet."
She went on to give a few more details, concluding with a promise to send them reports and dispatches. Then she mentioned,
"Ambassador Worf is already there with a Klingon task force, and Leah Brahms arrived there 3 days ago."
At the mention of Leah's name, Geordi LaForge looked up with interest from his engineering station. The last time he had seen Leah Brahms, he had told her he loved her. But with all that had happened to her, including the loss of her husband to the Genesis wave, they had agreed to meet in about 10 months at a conference in Paris on theoretical propulsion. Now LaForge's heart beat faster as he realized he might see her sooner.
I assume, Admiral, that you want us to go to Aluna and join Worf and Leah Brahms in helping this unfortunate planet.
"Yes, Captain. And maintain your position until I beam Raynor Slevin and Regimal to your ship. I feel they might be useful. In fact, Regimal was on Aluna just before the wave struck. Both of them are now mission specialists assigned directly to me. Nechayev out."
Picard strode toward his ready room.
Khan, set a course for Aluna and get underway at maximum warp just as soon as Regimal and Raynor Slevin are aboard. I'd like to see both of them in my ready room when they arrive.
Data interrupted. "Sir, we are receiving data transmissions from Admiral Nechayev."
I'll read them in private, Data. Make sure everyone on the staff sees it."
Picard entered his ready room and sat at his desk. He brought up the newly arrived reports on his terminal. Frowning with concern, the captain read about Aluna's Genesis experience. This Marla Carew is a fascinating character, decided Picard, having come out of obscurity in an Alunan jail to lead her people in a desperate evacuation. She was under investigation for the murder of the Overseer, the person who had yanked her from obscurity. Had power corrupted her? One thing was clear. At the moment, Aluna was no more than a handful of ships, thousands of transporter satellites, and a world under siege by frightening new life forms. Only the Klingons, Leah Brahms, and Marla Carew stood between partial success and total disaster. A distinguished-looking Romulan entered his ready room, followed by a hulking but humble Antosian, his raven hair tied in an elaborate topknot. Regimal gave the captain an insouciant smile, and Raynor Slevin lowered his head submissively. The captain chose his words carefully.
Regimal, I know that Admiral Nechayev has considerable faith in you, and that you are accustomed to operating independently. But I want you to know that as long as you are on this ship, you are under my command. We had a very disturbing incident with another Romulan who was wearing an interface generator, and I want you to curtail walking through walls and becoming invisible while on this ship, unless I give you an order to do so. Is that understood? Perfectly, Captain. As a matter of fact, that other Romulan stole my invention. It was never intended to be used for espionage against Starfleet. Picard mustered a smile. I understand that. But there may be some on this ship who harbor ill feelings about that device you wear on your chest. Now Picard turned his attention to the large, almost childlike Antosian, who looked away with embarrassment. Mr. Slevin, I was hoping that you would never have to see Alyssa Ogawa and her family again.
because she definitely harbors ill feelings toward you, after you, in very misguided intentions, used your shape-shifting ability to fool her daughter into thinking that her father had returned safely from his encounter with the Genesis wave. The Antosia nodded. I don't blame her. Picard remembered how they had rescued Slevin from the Barcelona, a vessel that suffered the horrible effects of the Genesis wave when a spatial rift had opened inside the ship and radiation and creatures from another dimension had killed the crew. Only Slevin had miraculously escaped. Slevin hung his head in shame. You rescued me, and Nurse Ogawa saved my life, and I repaid her by impersonating her husband. I won't do it again. Sometimes I wish I had died on the Barcelona. Picard pursed his lips together. Mr. Slevin, there is an old Terran saying, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But as I just told Regimal, your powers are not to be used on this ship unless I order you to do so. The Antosian nodded humbly. I promise, Captain. I won't. Regimal patted his Antosian colleague on his broad back. I'll look after him, Captain. I feel like we're kind of a team now. One of the most dangerous teams in the galaxy, thought Picard. After the captain gave them their cabin assignments, he got down to business. How much do you know about our mission to Aluna? I understand you were there, Regimal. Yes, and a quite delightful planet it was. Raynor Slevin sighed. But they hate us. Technology we invented killed 9/10 of their population. How could they not hate us? For that question, the captain had no answer. On board the Darzor for the last 3 days, Leah Brahms could clearly see that getting transporter booths to the surface of Aluna was more important than anything else at the moment. She had come to help, but Marla Carew would not even see her. Carew had locked herself in her lab. But Leah was puzzled why the Alunans were filling the planet with transporter booths when they didn't even know if the survivors were still alive. After many attempts, Leah had finally been allowed to see Carew inside the laboratory, where Leah confronted the scowling scientist. You asked the Federation for help many days ago, and we arrived too late to give it to you. I'm trying to make it up to you. I've noticed that you haven't rescued anyone from the satellites in a few days, ever since the transporter incident. Wincing, Carew rubbed the rows of eyebrows lining her troubled brow. Yes, we've been afraid to try it again, until we're ready to bring everyone down. Time is running out, and we're not sure how badly the fungus has spread along the bio-neural network of the satellites. It's my theory that if we can minimize transfers and bring everyone down quickly, we can avoid the worst side effects. Leah nodded. Well, I've got a theory too. I presume you've still got the satellite that malfunctioned? Carew nodded. Yes. After we checked it out and found out about the fungus, we returned it to orbit. Leah made her proposal. Well, we've got 1 million of those giant slug creatures down on the planet. I say we beam one of them into the pattern buffers on the affected satellite, or any satellite you want to test. Then beam it back to the planet and see what happens. If it reintegrates properly, you'll know it's working. Vilo finally spoke up. That's a good idea. It wouldn't be hard to do either. Leah started to the door. I'll go back to Aluna and ask Worf to capture one of those creatures. Beam down to Base 2 when you're ready to conduct the experiment. Some of the Klingon shuttlecraft have transporters, and we can use one to beam it up. Then we can use any of your blue boxes to return the creature. Marla almost smiled at Leah. Thank you, Dr. Brahms. We appreciate your help. Leah then remembered to tell Marla one last thing. There's more help on the way. The Enterprise is supposed to arrive tomorrow. It's the Federation's most celebrated starship, and we can't give you any better help than that. After Leah Brahms had left the laboratory, the smile melted from Marla Carew's face. That's just what we need, more meddlers from the Federation. We're going to save our world, and get even for what was done to us. Feeling overwhelmed, Alexander Rozhenko walked down the corridor, headed to the quarters he'd been assigned on the Darzor. As he approached his door, he noticed that it was open a few centimeters, and bristles on the back of his neck stood at attention. He entered cautiously, looking for signs of unauthorized entry, and noted that a pad he had left on his desk was now missing. There were 2 closets and space under the bunk beds where a person could hide, but Alexander fought the temptation to tear the room apart. He calmly washed his hands in the basin, spent a few seconds grooming himself, then walked out into the corridor and waited. It wasn't long before his patience was rewarded. When a slight figure slipped out, Alexander pounced like a Capellan power cat, grabbed the intruder by the neck in the crook of his arm, and almost snapped his neck. The pad dropped to the deck. His foe was whimpering within seconds. It was the young Cirrus consort, the one named Farlow. "Don't kill me! I didn't mean any harm. I wanted to see if you had found out who did it." "You mean who murdered the overseer? Don't you think I would tell you if I found out? Your explanation is insufficient, and I've got a good mind to put you under guard with the rest of your family." Farlow glared defiantly at Alexander. "Overseer Podrin would let me out." Alexander scowled. "Not if I grab you by the scruff of your neck and drag you to a Klingon vessel where I would put you in irons." Farlow gulped. I want to help you." Alexander narrowed his eyes at the young captive. "You know who did it, don't you?" I have a suspicion." "Who?" Moving as quickly as a targ surprised in the bush, Farlow jumped to his feet and dashed down the corridor. Alexander realized that he could never catch the lad before he reached the safety of Overseer Podrin. But Farlow was confined to the Darzor, so he couldn't run far. There would be another opportunity to corner him and extract the information. Such secrets could not be kept forever. The Klingons had killed so many of the giant slug creatures that Worf feared they might have trouble finding one for Leah Brahms's experiment. Ever since they had discovered that they were indeed good eating, the Klingons assigned to the planet had been eating them in everything from stew to barbecued shish kebab, and they had even given them a name, Nujgarg. The flavor was almost addictive, despite the distasteful necessity of cooking the slugs to kill the fungus. Worf had let his men decimate the local food animal because it helped to eradicate the moss creatures, who had also acquired a Klingon name, Poklod, meaning plant man. Following a trail of dead Nujgarg dragged along the ground, the starving Poklod would shamble out of the forest into ambushes set by the Klingons, who would proceed to hack them into confetti before they knew what had hit them. So it was that Worf now led a small band of 6 warriors fairly deep into the jungle from Base 1. Worf was too busy hacking and slicing his way through the grotesque undergrowth when he suddenly stumbled into a hole and was waist-deep in foul, slimy water. Suddenly, a monstrous tentacle whipped out of the brown sludge and wrapped around his neck. It was so thick that he cut only part way through the massive knot of muscles, and he might have drowned immediately if his comrades hadn't waded into the bog, blades flying. In high spirits, the Klingons slashed and stabbed at the massive creature hidden under the roiling waves. Finally, the creature was clearly in retreat from the flurry of slashing blades. Spitting up sludge, Worf finally crawled out of the brackish pool and inspected his suit. It was torn in 3 places, and the faceplate was cracked, which meant that he had to get back to the shuttlecraft as soon as possible.
My suit has been compromised. The rest of you proceed for 100 more meters along the bank of this bog. If you can't capture a Nujgarg by then, head back to camp. Don't take any chances.
Trudging wearily, Worf retraced his steps, wondering how his adopted son Jeremy was faring back on Earth.
Dad, how are you?
Worf stopped and whirled around, only to see his blonde-haired son smiling at him. Worf knew that Jeremy couldn't be here on Aluna. But for the moment, he needed something, and so he was willing to play along.
Jeremy, I'm hungry. I need a Nujgarg. Can you point one out to me?
The young human frowned at him.
Come on, Dad. Haven't you and your friends taken enough meat creatures? It's time for all of you to go home.
Worf had been in enough negotiations to know that one had just begun.
What do you offer us if we go home?
The young man stepped forward.
Peace, nostalgia, and comfort. Wouldn't you like to be with Kalair again? Or all of the old comrades you served with and miss so much? You don't have to fear us. We could be a source of great comfort in your world.
Stop! We don't want fakes and false comfort. When our loved ones are gone, they're gone, except for living in our hearts and memories.
The false Jeremy looked troubled by this.
We didn't know it would be so difficult to connect with you.
Worf!
Looking over Jeremy's shoulder, Worf saw his cadre of warriors stopped on the path 20 meters away. They carried a squirming Nujgarg tied to a pole slung across their shoulders, and several of them were drawing disruptor pistols.
Hold your fire. I know it's one of them. It is leaving and taking a message.
Worf turned back to the shimmering creature, who now looked like his dead wife, Kalair.
Gather your race and take them to the farthest reaches of Aluna. If we never see you again, perhaps you'll be spared. But you must leave us completely alone, or you'll be hunted down and killed, every last one of you.
Very well, Worf. But you don't know what you are giving up.
I know, but I would rather have real pain than false pleasure. Go quickly.
And Kalair faded into the thick vines and brush of the Alunan forest. Worf's lieutenant rushed forward.
What were you doing talking to that monster? My job. I am an ambassador, remember? The enemy is beaten, and they know it.
The big saw-toothed slug writhed in the charred dirt of the base camp, trying to escape back to the jungle, and a Klingon prodded it brutally with a pole. Leah Brahms almost felt sorry for it. She looked at Alexander.
How are we going to get that thing into a shuttlecraft and onto a transporter platform?
Alexander Rozhenko drew his Starfleet phaser.
I can stun it.
He turned to Marla Carew.
Is that acceptable?
The former regent crossed her arms.
Stunned or alert, it shouldn't affect the experiment. By the way, where is your father?
Ambassador Worf had to return to the Dog J for medical attention. They had an encounter with some kind of swamp creature, and his suit got torn.
Marla then held up an isolinear chip that she showed to Alexander.
I have an emulation program which should turn your shuttlecraft transporter into one of our blue booths, complete with preset coordinates for the satellite we're testing. Can I run it to make sure?
Alexander waved her toward the waiting shuttle.
This craft is at your disposal.
The two of them entered the small vessel, leaving Leah Brahms outside shivering in the cold. Leah tried to concentrate on hopeful signs. The rate of plant growth had slowed somewhat, suggesting that the Genesis effect was approaching maturity. Still, the Alunans who had already returned moved like sullen ghosts through the unfriendly, unfinished landscape. Alexander's voice broke her out of her troubled thoughts.
We're ready, Dr. Brahms. The emulation works.
Alexander aimed his phaser. At once, the creature became still, lying in the dirt like a limp, slimy fish. It took two Klingons to drag the dead weight into the confines of the shuttlecraft, where it was transported to a satellite buffer. Leah Brahms remained outside. Soon, Marla Carew jumped out of the shuttlecraft and dashed to the nearest blue transporter on the edge of the clearing and checked the status panel inside. Then she spoke to Velo Garlett on the Darzor.
All right, Velo. The transporter booth here is on and ready. Proceed.
Leah Brahms lifted her tricorder, ready to check the slug's health. When the activity stopped, Carew hesitantly opened the door. The Nujgarg was lying on the transporter pad, unconscious but breathing. Brahms let out her pent-up breath and looked at Carew.
Success? Yes, but that was a satellite we expected to be successful. Now we're going to send it to the one which malfunctioned.
2 brawny Klingons picked up the stunned beast and carried it back into the shuttlecraft. After a few tense minutes, Carew returned to the transporter booth, issuing commands to her subordinate. Again, the blue booth hummed and crackled. When it was over, they pushed the door open, and there lay the slug creature, looking none the worse for wear. But something about the slug didn't look right to Leah. She took tricorder readings.
Marla, there's a problem. The creature is dead.
Marla slumped into the dirt and sat for a moment, legs crossed, staring down.
This means that every satellite which has dipped below the threshold is in doubt. We have to act no later than tomorrow.
Sitting on an examination table in sickbay on the Dog J, Worf looked quizzically at the cryptic message he had just received from Marla Carew. The message read,
Ambassador Worf, please accept our profound gratitude for all that you and the Klingons have done for Aluna. You can do no more, and we respectfully request that you withdraw your ships and forces.
Worf turned to the comm officer who had delivered the electronic missive.
Acknowledge receipt of message, and inform the Overseer that all Klingon vessels will withdraw, except for the Dog J, which will remain in orbit to meet the Enterprise. Inform the other ships in the task force to recall their shuttlecraft and crew members from the planet. Tell them to withdraw to the outer planet in the solar system, where they will await my orders. Do you have that?
Yes, sir.
One more thing. Tell my son Alexander to remain on the planet.
The young ensign hurried off, leaving the old veteran to ponder this sudden change in their relationship with the Alunans. Worf felt danger in the troubled atmosphere of Aluna. The Enterprise cruised majestically into orbit around the lush green planet, which was ringed by vivid volcanoes and thick gray clouds. Captain Picard had expected to see several Klingon vessels, along with a dozen or so Alunan vessels, but the stratosphere was oddly empty.
Data.
Where are the Klingons? Only one Klingon ship is in orbit, Captain, and that is the Dog J. Ambassador Worf is hailing us. A moment later, the dour face of Starfleet's first Klingon officer appeared on the overhead view screen.
Hello, Ambassador. I was expecting a bigger welcoming party.
Good to see you, Captain. By request of the Alunan authorities, the rest of my ships have withdrawn.
Picard nodded thoughtfully.
Does that mean the mission has been a success?
Hardly. Only a few hundred Alunans have been reconstituted from the satellites, and only 1% of the habitable land area has been reclaimed. Permission to come aboard with my son, Alexander. We could brief you and the rest of your staff in the observation lounge.
Make it so. Picard out.
Farlow Fuzwick peered through the double doors into the shuttle bay of the Darzor and saw the Cirrus's royal shuttlecraft, which had just returned from being pressed into service, herding satellites around. Farlow had been keeping a low profile and waiting for an opportunity to escape. Smoothing the wrinkles out of his satin tunic, Farlow lifted his chin and strode into the shuttle bay. He marched right up to the pilot. "Kanau, I'm sorry, but you can't go off duty yet. The Cirrus wishes to go down to the planet. Wait here while I fetch her." Trying to look dignified, Farlow exited the shuttle bay and hurried down the corridor to the laboratory, where he figured he would find Chandra. Inside, he looked around and saw that the only ones in the lab were Chandra and her dangerous friend, Velo Garlet. He didn't need a scorecard to know that Velo Garlet was responsible for turning Chandra into a murderer. Chandra was surprised. "Farlow, what are you doing here? I've got to talk to you, alone." The crazed scientist scowled.
I need a bathroom break. Don't be long.
After they were alone, Farlow gripped Chandra's shoulders. "Listen, you've got to come with me, and we've got to get off this ship. You're in danger here. I've got a shuttlecraft and a pilot. We could go down to Aluna and hide there. Chandra looked away. Why do we have to hide? You know why. You could pretend to be Cirrus Geneset. You've done it before. Worf's son, Alexander, he's going to figure it out sooner or later. You killed the Overseer. Chandra hid her face in her hands and began to cry. They didn't tell me. Not that he would die. It was an accident. He was just supposed to get sick. Velo Garlett entered with Marla Carew at his side. The two of them looked suspiciously at the young Cirrus consort. Marla stared at Chandra as she wiped her eyes. What are you doing here? Farlow answered grandly. This is part of my domain. I came here to ask my friend to have dinner with me. Right now, if she's available. Velo narrowed his eyes at Farlow, but Marla brushed him off with a smile. I think we can oblige the Overseer consort. Go ahead, Chandra. Enjoy yourself. Farlow instantly grabbed his friend's hand and pulled her toward the door. Come along, my dear. We're having your favorite dishes. When they reached the corridor, Farlow laughed out loud, but Chandra looked frightened. I can't really look like the Cirrus except in the dark. They'll spot me. No, they won't. Nobody goes down to Aluna unless they're wearing a suit that covers them from head to toe. All you have to do is wear this suit and yell at the pilot. I'll do all the talking. You just look important. With a giggle, they took off running down the corridor, holding each other's hands. Back in the laboratory, while she was modifying a transporter console to remotely control the chromosynthesis emitters hidden in every transporter box on Aluna, Marla spoke to Velo. That girl Chandra knows too much. Velo smiled. She won't talk. Not unless she wants to stand trial for murdering the Overseer. Carew nearly dropped the spanner in her hand. Are you telling me that girl was the one? With my help. And now that the Klingons are gone, who's to stand in our way? We'll turn Aluna back into a paradise, free our people, and claim our rightful place as rulers of this planet. Feeling much older, Marla shuddered. We started out as saviors, and now we're murderers. Or maybe we've always been murderers. What are you talking about, Marla? It's the Federation who are the murderers. They invented Genesis. Come on. We want to be done with this by the time dawn comes to the camps. Every seat at the conference table in the observation lounge of the Enterprise was filled. There were several usual faces, noted Captain Picard. Will Riker, Beverly Crusher, Deanna Troi, Data, Geordi LaForge, plus one glowering face which had been missing for a few years. Worf. There were 3 observers present who had never been there before. Regimal, Raynor Slevin, and Worf's son, Alexander Rozhenko. All listened intently as Worf related the Klingons' experiences on Aluna. When he was finished, Worf turned the floor over to Alexander to discuss the murder of Overseer Tajaret. But the murder and internal politics were overshadowed by the tremendous drive and determination of Marla Carew, plus the unknown fate of 8 million Alunans trapped in a fragile string of satellites circling the planet. Picard had the first question for Worf. Any idea why they asked your task force to leave? None. Then Geordi asked a pressing question. Where is Leah Brahms? I presume she's still on the planet. Alexander nodded. Yes, Dr. Brahms and I were down there this morning when they conducted the last experiment with the transporter booths. It didn't go well. And we still have a handful of warriors down there, and there are maybe 300 fully inoculated Alunans living in the shelters we erected. As you can imagine, life is hard on Aluna. Beverly Crusher asked the next question. The moss creatures? Have they been much of a problem? Not anymore. They are mostly vanquished. Will Riker sat forward. These transporter booths, Worf, are they ready to be used? As far as we can tell. I don't know why they're waiting.
but I think it would be a surprise if everyone in those pattern buffers survived.
Captain Picard stroked his chin thoughtfully, then turned to LaForge. Did our sensors tell you anything about the satellites? The engineer shook his head doubtfully. They've got a bio-neural network. I don't think the satellites are in very good shape. If it were me, I wouldn't wait another minute. Is there anything we could actually do to help them? Data responded. It is unlikely, sir. This was an existing transportation system, and the satellite's emitters and beam conduits are all key to individual transporter booths. The dignified Romulan Regimal spoke next. Captain Picard, Raynor and I could slip aboard their ship and find out more information. The captain waved the suggestion aside. I'm not ready to interfere yet, unless we're asked. But I think we should send an away team down to the planet to check out the conditions for ourselves. Riker jumped to his feet. Worf?
Commander Riker, I'm with you.
And what about you, Alexander? I'd like to get back to the Darzor and find that boy, Farlow, to ask him a few questions. LaForge rose to his feet. Commander, can I go with you? Riker gave the engineer an understanding smile. Sure, Geordi. Data, you too. While the lounge began to empty, Regimal sidled up to Alexander. Does Marla Carew have an assistant named Velo Garlett? Yes, I believe she does. The Romulan nodded slyly. Look to him for information. He's been plotting against the Alunan royal family for a long time. And as your father would say, be wary. Leah Brahms sat in front of the campfire studying the night sky over Aluna. On a night such as this, when the blizzards and howling winds were strangely absent, the new Aluna could be almost beautiful in its primitive, unspoiled state. Every hour or so, a shuttlecraft would land or take off from the clearings. One, bearing the Alunan royal seal, had landed a few minutes ago to let off 2 passengers. Another shuttlecraft was arriving, and Leah peered into the night sky. She jumped to her feet. It was a Starfleet shuttlecraft. Out of the hatch, the first Starfleet officer she had seen in days stepped out. Leah identified him as Commander Riker, and she waved. Then came Worf, wielding his bat'leth and looking around warily. The third officer to emerge was even more familiar. She instantly recognized his dusky skin and bionic eyes and rushed forward to meet him.
Geordi, it's great to see you.
Geordi beamed.
Hi, Leah. This isn't exactly Paris, is it?
The lights dimmed on the shuttlecraft, and Data stepped out, dressed as usual in nothing more than his normal uniform. He paused in the chill air to study a tricorder, while Riker lifted a nightscope to his eyes and studied the perimeter. Worf strode to a tiny encampment of Klingons, but Geordi did nothing but stare at Leah. Data soon joined them. I am picking up only minute airborne traces of the fungus. In my opinion, humanoids could reside in this area without environmental suits. Please do not tell Dr. Crusher I suggested that. Geordi smiled.
I won't, Data.
He turned to Leah.
All we've been hearing about are the blue transporter booths. Could I see one of them?
Leah went toward the perimeter, with Geordi and Data following. When she reached the nearest blue transporter enclosure, she stopped and pointed to it.
There it is. Every ship in orbit has been running replicators and making these for over a week, and they just put the last one in place a couple of hours ago. I've heard them say that it comes complete with everything, including a...
Leah opened the door of the booth and promptly screamed with shock and surprise because slumped on the floor, mouth agape in a horrible manner, and looking badly decomposed, was a dead, naked body. Including a corpse, said Data, finishing her sentence. Alexander Rozhenko paced in the corridor outside the royal stateroom on the Darzor, eyeing the 2 Alunan constables angrily. Please tell the Cirrus that it's urgent I see her. We are sorry, but she left orders not to be disturbed. Arr! Alexander rushed up to the door. Open up, Cirrus! A sleepy-eyed but still fetching blonde dressed in filmy nightclothes answered the door. What is all the commotion, Alexander? I'm looking for Farlow. He's disappeared. Disappeared? But I saw him just a few units ago. The ship's computer can locate him. Please come in. The two of them strode across her sumptuous stateroom to her terminal. Computer, where on the ship is Cirrus consort Farlow Fuzwick?
Farlow Fuzwick is not on the ship. His last known location was the shuttle bay.
Listen, Alexander. Before you assume he's left the ship, check the laboratory. His friend Condra has been working there with Marla Carew. Alexander rushed out the door. A minute later, he reached the laboratory and found 3 armed constables waiting for him. I'm looking for Farlow, the Cirrus consort. The largest Alunan constable took a threatening step toward the young Klingon. He's not here. What about his friend, the girl named Condra? The Alunans looked at one another with surprise, then one answered. She left with the Cirrus consort about 1 unit ago. Marla Carew suddenly strode out the laboratory door, looking enraged. Velo Garlett poked his head out of the laboratory. Professor, you can't go now! I have to confront them. You know what to do if you get my signal. A constable stepped in front of Marla. You aren't allowed to leave without permission. Realizing Alexander was there, she turned and pointed to him. He can give me permission to go to Aluna. Alexander nodded and motioned her down the corridor. Yes, I can, and I'll go with you. But one quick question. Where are Condra and Farlow Fuzwick? I have no idea. They left and never came back. A few moments later, they strode into the transporter room, and Marla bounded onto the transporter platform with Alexander at her side. Marla gave an order to the transporter operator. Send us to Base 2 on the surface. Alexander looked at Marla with alarm. Don't we need environmental suits? Marla scoffed at him. And they told me Klingons were brave. They have plenty of suits down there if you are afraid. Energize. The two of them materialized in the chilly wasteland of Aluna, surrounded by campfires, temporary shelters, and a few scattered shuttlecraft. Their destination was soon apparent because several crouched figures were gathered around one of the blue transporter booths, looking at a body lying prone on the ground. Marla strode up to the figures, who were unrecognizable in their environmental suits, except for the android, Data. Alexander realized that this was the away team from the Enterprise, and he soon identified his father, Riker, and the others. They had apparently discovered a badly decomposed body. Marla took one look at the body and gasped. Curate Malavzon! He went missing before the wave struck. Where did you find him? Leah Brahms answered.
In the transporter booth. Are you ready to let us help you?
Marla's back stiffened. I think the Federation has done quite enough already. Everything is under control. Geordi LaForge held up a pad.
That's not the impression we get. We've run scans on your satellites, and many of those pattern buffers are destabilizing at an alarming rate.
I begged you for help, but that was weeks ago, when help would have done us some good. Now we're ready to reclaim our planet, for Alunans, not the Federation. Nothing will stop us from victory. Data stepped forward. Something might. The unusual circuitry you have in the base of your transporter booth is sapping the solar power cells. If you could explain to us the purpose of these emitters, perhaps we could find a way to increase energy efficiency. If not, I fear the power cells will fail under heavy usage. A dark cloud passed over Marla's weathered face, and she lifted her left wrist and squeezed her communications bracelet. I'll show you what these emitters do, because I can't let you meddle in our lives anymore. The transporter booth suddenly came alive, glowing with an eerie amber light. When Marla Carew ran at full speed away from the enclosure, the away team looked uneasily at one another, except for Data, who studied his tricorder intently. There is a large buildup of Kedion particles. I suggest vacating the area. Do not use transporters. That was enough for Riker, Worf, LaForge, Brahms, and Alexander, who ran at full speed through the camp, waving at everyone.
Run! Take cover! Get away from the transporter!
Suddenly, the transporter booth erupted like a sun going nova, and a shockwave resonated outward in every direction. The trees rippled and wilted. The oxygen was sucked out of the air. They could do little more than grasp roots and rocks while their lungs screamed for air. Alexander looked up and marveled at the way Data stood in the center of the maelstrom, light and strange energy ripples flowing all around him while he continued to take readings. Alexander's lungs were starting to burn when they abruptly filled with air that he could breathe. His father, Worf, glared into the misty darkness.
Where is Marla Carew?
Neither one of them could see much of anything because the campfires and lights on the shuttlecraft had all gone out. The transporter booth was dark again, too. A mighty tree from the edge of the jungle suddenly toppled over and fell to the ground. More trees began to fall. Without warning, the ground beneath Alexander turned to mushy mud and then slimy quicksand, and he was sinking. Alexander reached for his father's hand.
Don't struggle, Alexander. Try to float on top.
Commander Riker shouted somewhere in the blackness.
The ground is liquefying. Try to float. Don't struggle.
Floating was possible, Alexander discovered just as soon as he stopped panicking. And he knew who was responsible, because he remembered Marla Carew telling Velo Garlett to wait for her signal. He wondered what those crazy Illuminans had done. At the edge of the forest, two youths held each other as they crouched under a hollow log. Chandra whispered to Farlow fearfully, "What is going on?" "I don't know, Chandra." Even though it was dark, the whole planet seemed to have a strange golden halo, and they gripped each other even more tightly, waiting for the end of everything. On the Enterprise, the normal running lights went out, and the emergency lights went on, bathing the bridge in an eerie red light. Picard turned to look at Beverly Crusher, who was on bridge duty as acting first officer, and her eyes widened in amazement. It wasn't often that the power went off unexpectedly on the immense starship.
Picard to engineering. What is going on?
"Unknown, sir. All systems are down except for communications and emergency." Without warning, the transmission went dead, and the captain's feet lifted off the deck.
Khan, get us out of here.
The helmsman held himself in his seat with one hand and tried to work his board with the other, to no avail. "Helm is not responding, sir. We're losing all ship's systems, including artificial gravity." Picard turned to see Beverly Crusher giving him a brave smile. "Captain, we could lose warp containment." Picard hooked the arm of his chair with his foot and pulled himself down to his command panel. Under the fading red light, he entered his private access code and a ship-wide alert.
"All hands, abandon ship. Proceed to escape pods. All hands, abandon ship."
The Darzor pitched back and forth, losing altitude and helm control, and Velo Garlett was slammed against the transporter console he had just used to unleash the chromosynthesis process. Whatever strange side effects had rippled back along the control waves to the ships in orbit, the anti-Genesis device had already done its job on the planet. The royal yacht heaved and yawed like a rowboat caught in a hurricane. Overseer Padron and Cirrus Geneset charged inside. Geneset's hands were balled into fists. "What have you done? Where's Marla?" Velo Garlett staggered from behind his console.
She's on the planet. I don't know what's happening. We had to get Aluna back to normal.
This is Captain Uzel. We're re-entering the atmosphere. All hands, brace for impact.
As Overseer Padron floated to the ceiling of the laboratory, the short-lived ruler of Aluna began to weep. Streaking out of control toward Aluna, the sleek yacht Darzor gradually turned into a giant fireball with a long tail of smoke, then shattered into a billion burning embers. Floating weightlessly, Captain Picard climbed out of the gloomy Jeffries tube into the corridor outside engineering. Clanging behind him on a tether was a large white suit. Following the Genesis wave threat, Starfleet was supposed to have returned all the Brahms radiation suits to the Romulans, because Leah Brahms had infringed upon Romulan phase-shifting technology to make her protective garment. But Geordi LaForge had saved one suit as a souvenir, and Picard had just liberated it from Geordi's quarters. Since the comm system was down, Picard and Beverly Crusher were using old-fashioned walkie-talkies to communicate with.
Jean-Luc, the last escape pod is away. There's one pod left for you and me, and I'll meet you on Deck 6. Over.
Beverly, don't wait for me. Get in the escape pod and launch. I have the Brahms radiation suit, and I'm going into the warp chamber to try manual ejection of the core.
You'll be killed, Jean-Luc. Besides, that's a two-person job at the very least.
I won't be killed unless I fail. Get into the escape pod and launch. That's an order. Picard out. Carefully, but with a sense of urgency, Picard climbed into the bulky white suit. The gel interior molded to the contours of his body, shrinking or expanding as needed. The controls were in the fingers of the gloves, and the upper right-hand corner of the faceplate gave him a reflective view screen of instructions and readings. The captain activated the suit, which gave him one immediate advantage: magnetized soles on the boots, which allowed him to walk again. He was relieved to see that the power levels were sufficient for 10 minutes of operation. He walked up to the sealed door of engineering and entered his security access code. The hatch unsealed, and the door creaked open a few centimeters. He pushed it open some more, and then gasped as the unequal air pressure caused a bloated corpse to crash into him. The dead engineer's skin was peeled off and his eyes bulged grotesquely. Half a dozen other bodies floated ominously in the cavernous hold of engineering. The towering warp coil in the center of the circular silo looked like a neon Christmas tree, ablaze with white branches of pure energy and crackling beams that looked like lightning. It looked as if it could blow apart any second, turning the Enterprise into a gaseous cloud and spreading antimatter and radiation throughout the atmosphere. That alone might kill all life on the planet. Even if they didn't eject the warp core, the ship would soon lose orbit and burn up in the atmosphere. Once launched, the core had a self-contained guidance system that would steer it harmlessly into space. Suddenly, Picard heard a voice behind him.
We'd better hurry.
Picard turned around as quickly as he could in the radiation suit, but there was no one there.
Who's there?
It's me, Regimal.
For a fleeting instant, the Romulan appeared, then disappeared, and the captain realized that Regimal had activated his own interface device. Whether it fully protected the Romulan from the radiation, the captain didn't know. But here was the help he badly needed.
The manual controls are over here, Captain. Hurry.
There were 3 innocuous-looking hand-turned wheels. One to jettison the exterior hull plate, another to disengage the pylons holding the towering warp core in place, and a third to feed rocket fuel to the thrusters, which ignited when reaching threshold. All of it had to be accomplished in a matter of seconds. Picard could see the flickering image of Regimal turning the first wheel. He heard the exterior hull plate being jettisoned, and he grabbed the second disc and turned it with all his might. The towering metal struts and sparking cables fell away from the shimmering warp coil. The glowing structure began to tremble like a rocket about to take off. A ghostly figure moved to his other side and began to turn the third wheel. Together they turned it 1 centimeter after another, until they could hear the thrusters were firing all around them. Suddenly the core erupted in flames and dropped straight down through a monstrous hole in the deck. Now Picard had to grip the wheel with all his strength just to avoid being sucked out. He gripped his comrade by an invisible arm.
You saved the ship. Come on.
One more thing, Captain. To restore emergency power to the helm, override the driver coil assembly and patch EPS power to the auxiliary computer core. I can't move. You will have to do it.
Picard didn't question these orders, but he had to wonder how a Romulan knew so much about the engineering systems of a Federation starship. Picard entered the instructions, breathed another huge sigh of relief, and turned to look for Regimol as the auxiliary computer systems gradually came back online. He found the Romulan floating at the wheel they had just rotated, freed the Romulan's body, and carried him outside in the corridor. At the same moment, the computer inside the Brahms radiation suit announced,
Power failing. This suit is inoperative.
Picard then saw Beverly Crusher emerge from the Jeffries tube and come running toward him, a medkit in her hand. Another person crawled out right behind her. The captain collapsed to the deck, his back against the bulkhead. He pointed to the fallen Romulan.
Beverly, you've got to help Regimol.
Regimol? Picard looked up to see the Romulan standing behind Beverly, with the other Regimol lying prone at their feet. The hero of the day suddenly materialized in full, and all three of them gasped. Even with his horrendous burns and horribly disfigured face, they could recognize the soft-spoken Antosian, Raynor Slevin. With a tearful mixture of anger and grief, the real Regimol yelled at his friend, "You idiot! You stole my interface box!" Slevin, a former Starfleet technician, could barely speak. "Had to do it. You wouldn't have known what to do." As Dr. Crusher opened her medkit and prepared a hypo spray, the Antosian shook his head. "There's no point, Doctor. I should have died on the Barcelona. I couldn't save that ship, but I saved this one." Then Raynor Slevin slowly expelled his last breath of air, and peace came to his charred body and tortured soul. Picard staggered wearily to his feet and looked around at his intact but deserted ship.
Thanks to Raynor Slevin, I won't be going down with her after all. Picard to away team. Are you there, number 1?
Captain, we've been trying to contact you. We saw the escape pods coming down and have been trying to collect the crew. But things are pretty strange down here. It's something that the Illuminans did. They tried to reverse the Genesis effect or something. We won't know exactly what they did until we find Marla Carew.
Former regent, professor, and lover to an overseer, Marla Carew sat dumbfounded on a worm-ridden log and surveyed the sun coming up over, not the paradise she had envisioned, not the overgrown chaos of Genesis, but something much worse. Unleashing widespread chromosynthesis without testing was tantamount to killing an already ill patient. She had destroyed what she set out to save. Something rustled in the brackish, leaf-covered swamp in front of her, and Marla looked up but didn't move. She watched transfixed as a mammoth serpent with long tentacles and 3 beady, blistered eyes rose from the depths. The beast hovered ever closer, showing her rows and rows of interlaced, pick-like teeth. "Go ahead and kill me. I deserve to die for my arrogance." She had squandered her people's faith in her, and she had introduced murder where there was none. The creature lunged its massive head toward her, jaws agape. A flash came out of the jungle and hit the beast a glancing blow near the base of its neck. The beast ducked quickly out of sight. Marla turned to see her former assistant, Complum, wielding a Klingon disruptor rifle. That should have killed it. What a monster! Marla glumly stared at her young apprentice. "And you deprived him of his dinner. If you've come here to capture me, you might as well shoot me. Unlike that animal, I'll make sure to die." Complum took the weapon off his shoulder and set it uneasily on the ground. "I've been watching you since you came back to camp with Alexander, and I saw where you ran, and I picked up this disruptor from a dead Klingon. There's been lots of death lately. Spare me the speeches, Complum. Just kill me or leave me alone." Complum hung his head. "I'm not completely blameless. I was the one who put the curate's body in the transporter booth. I announced him into your study, remember? You weren't paying much attention to me, so I retrieved him with the transporter." "Stop, Complum. I know my crimes. So shoot me with that Klingon stick. No, you don't get off that easily, Professor. You told those people you would save them. You put them into the care of machines, and now you have to free them. The satellites are dying, and the people will die too. Don't you care? Marla stared into the bleak, foreboding forest, smelling what seemed like sulfur and creosote. Then she stood up and lifted her chin. You're right. We have to get them out of those satellites. I'll go back to camp with you and confess to the murder I committed. I hope they'll let me advise them. Complom picked up his disruptor rifle. Let me speak for you. The key person now is Worf. He's in charge of this brutalized planet, which I have a hard time calling a Luna. He'll be very glad to see you. Worf scowled as he paced through the ooze of Base 1, or what was left of it. The survivors of the second catastrophe on Aluna had staked out a new camp on the high ground, although most of their shuttlecraft, shelters, and equipment were mired in a meter or two of mud. The snow and ash had been replaced by grit and sand from new strips of desert wasteland, but the moss creatures were a distant memory, and Worf felt no fear or psychic pull from them. Everyone had discarded their headgear, but most were still wearing their envirosuits for protection from the cold. The transporter booth had been moved beside their half-submerged shuttlecraft, and broken metal walls from the geodesic domes had been laid down to walk upon. Leah Brahms, Geordi, Data, and most of the away team toiled down there, trying to figure out what to do for the people trapped in the satellites. With the ships in orbit out of commission or gone, there was very little they could do to help anyone on the ground. Alexander and two of the Klingons were trying to calm the panicked Alunans. Will Riker stood on a nearby sand dune, staring upward at an angry amber sky. Seeing Worf, Riker waved, then skidded down on his heels toward the Klingon's position. The Enterprise has resumed orbit and is almost back online, but transporters are still iffy. Something caught Worf's eye, coming out of the bedraggled forest at the edge of the green zone. It was Marla Carew. An Alunan with a disruptor rifle was guiding her toward camp. Worf and Riker strode toward the approaching pair. Members of the away team, Alexander, several Klingons, and a number of Alunans, walked solemnly up the barren ridge, their scarves and tattered garments whipping in the wind.
Marla Carew, you have sabotaged our efforts and your own. I'm placing you under arrest.
The young Alunan with the disruptor rifle stepped forward. Ambassador Worf, I am Complom, her assistant, and I captured her. By captor's right in the Klingon canon, I can determine what's done with this prisoner. She remains in my custody until the fate for her crime is determined. Worf clenched his teeth.
That is a very old law.
But he nodded in agreement. Marla then addressed Worf and the others. The most important thing is to get our people out of the satellite buffers. If we can just contact the Darzor...
Worf scowled. The Darzor was lost, with all hands on board. You killed about half of your own survivors with that senseless act of yours. And you nearly destroyed the Enterprise. Fortunately, the Dog J had shields up and was able to move off to a safe distance. There are no ships in orbit which can save us from whatever you did to this poor world.
Drawing on reserves of strength, the professor rose to her feet and looked the Klingon squarely in the eye. I'll gladly take whatever punishment you deem fit. But first, please help me free the survivors from our transporters. Marla retrieved an isolinear chip from an inner pocket of her envirosuit. This is the emulation program I used to send a test animal to our satellite yesterday. It should enable us to tap into the system from any of your shuttlecraft transporters. Data announced the bad news. Our shuttlecraft is without power, as are the Klingon shuttles. Marla Carew's face tensed with determination. Can the Enterprise launch a shuttlecraft? Riker looked doubtful.
There are plenty of shuttlecraft on the ship, but only our captain, our doctor, and the Romulan are on board.
I know that Regimal can fly a shuttlecraft. I want to analyze a few of the satellites in orbit and try to get the return sequence started. Data held out his hand to take the isolinear chip. May I? I would like to understand your transporter algorithms and matrices. I can analyze this aboard the shuttlecraft. Worf turned to Riker.
I'll contact Captain Picard.
Then the Klingon looked back at Marla.
Who is now the head of the government?
Alexander stepped toward his father.
The Cirrus consort. Now that Padrin and Geneset are dead, he's the only member of the royal family left. I know he escaped from the Darzor because I followed him down here. Take some men, Alexander, and find him.
In a sickly part of the jungle, surrounded by majestic but fallen trees, Farlow and Chandra sat in a circle of about 10 Illuminans who had managed to start a fire out of brittle wood and branches. Now they had a good-sized conflagration going, even though the sparks threatened to catch some of the neighboring brush on fire. Farlow looked around, wishing he could do something to lift their spirits, but his spirits were down too. They had been safe on the ship, and now he was beginning to second-guess his decision to bring Chandra down here. A newcomer came to the fire circle and sat down, speaking in despairing tones to the others.
I heard that all the royal family is dead. The Darzor was destroyed when that second pulse went off.
Chandra squeezed Farlow's hand. If that was true, they had both lost friends on the Darzor. Staring mournfully into the flames, they thought of all those who had gone to be with the divine. Those who had died almost seemed like the lucky ones. Above the planet, the Starfleet shuttlecraft cruised within 20 meters of the impressive wingspan of the satellite. In the cockpit, Regimal piloted the craft, while Leah Brahms glanced over the shoulders of Geordi, Data, Marla Carew, and Complum, who were huddled around a bank of sensor readouts. Data had interfaced Marla's isolinear chip with the shuttle's sensors and transporter and was running the emulation program. Data punched commands onto his board at blazing speed. Satellite acknowledges us, is still operational, in standby mode. Marla frowned. That's actually bad, because they're supposed to be in ready mode. Be careful before you bring it out of standby. If there's not enough power, you could have a fatal emergency shutdown. But a level 2 diagnostic should give us more information. Marla asked Data for permission to enter the command, and Data stepped aside. Be my guest. As Marla read the results of the diagnostic, her face twisted in disbelief. The plasma gel packs must be damaged, or the readings couldn't sink that low. We've got to get them out. When everything fails, they'll die. Data continued to scroll through screens of sensor readouts. We have 5 units left, or about 6 hours. Marla brushed back her graying hair. To bring everyone off as quickly as possible, we've got to get the satellites up to full power. And I don't think we can wait for the sun to do it. How can we recharge everything in time? Leah Brahms looked at Geordi, and he shook his head glumly, fresh out of ideas. The Enterprise has no reserve power. They can't help us, and they're the only ship in orbit. Marla felt total despair. Our people are doomed, and I'm to blame. Alexander Rozhenko waded through the rubble, burnt twigs and scorched bushes of the once luxuriant forest, a handful of Klingons and Illuminans behind him. They were following a trail after having heard of an encampment of Illuminans inside the forest. They met Farlow, Chandra, and a group of Illuminans making their way toward the base camp. When Farlow approached Alexander with a grin on his face, Alexander dropped down to one knee and bowed his head. Overseer Farlow, we came to tell you that your world needs you to rule. Farlow looked around with some embarrassment, and Chandra grinned at him, while the other Illuminans looked astonished. As they walked back, Farlow sidled up to Alexander. I can't be the overseer. I'm not even really a hybrid. I have this tube. Alexander quickened his step, making the lad keep up. I don't care. People need authority in time of crisis, and they need to feel a continuity in their society. Don't worry. We'll be here to help you. We Klingons have a saying, wear the sash. It means act the part, and people will think you were born to be the overseer. He winked at Farlow. Come on, you're a con artist. You can do it. I guess so, Alexander. But can I make your father regent? Alexander had an amused twinkle in his eye. Regent Worf. I'm afraid Worf is trying to get out of the diplomacy business. Then I'll make you regent. Alexander shook his head. You keep the power for now. Don't confuse your people. Farlow looked back at Chandra, then whispered to Alexander. Are you still investigating Overseer Tajaret's murder? Alexander gave him a sidelong glance. Yes, I am. Farlow looked at Alexander with pleading green eyes. Can you believe me when I tell you that the real murderer died on the Darzor? Alexander eyed the young ruler appraisingly. I know that all our evidence is gone. Perhaps I will conclude my report by saying that our primary suspects perished on the Darzor. I will consider it. Farlow sighed with relief. Thank you, Alexander. Then I'll take the overseer job and do the best I can. On the shuttlecraft, Leah Brahms plugged diligently away at a rear auxiliary console, assuming they would make a desperate attempt to free the survivors before the satellites went dead. In her opinion, nothing would work unless they could jumpstart the whole satellite booth connection in one fell swoop and keep it running as long as power would allow.
Yeah!
Suddenly, cheers went up from the cockpit, and Leah looked up. What happened? Regimal put the image of an impressive Klingon fleet up on his view screen. The beautiful Klingons have returned. The Dog J and all the ships in the task force are back in orbit over Aluna, 8 warships strong. Brahms looked at her chronometer. 3 hours and 45 minutes left. We'll do plasma discharges from all the ships in orbit along the satellite belt. That should give a substantial boost to all the satellites as long as their solar collectors are still intact. It might even help the booths on the ground, although that's not as crucial. Data cocked his head thoughtfully. It can do no harm, and it could potentially do a great deal of good. The venting of plasma is standard procedure, routine maintenance for the ships. I am sending your recommendation to all ships, asking the Dog J to coordinate. Marla bowed her head to Leah. Thank you, Dr. Brahms. What else have you been working on in silence back here? The human shifted in her chair and pointed to a schematic. I know one foolproof way to jumpstart the system. To fool it into thinking this is a regular day. Time to transport 8 million people like it usually does. Leah pointed to the small transporter platform a meter away. We know we can send an animal through from here, like you did with the previous test. So we need a volunteer to beam into the system, and at the same time we will use your emulator to issue the repeat command, as if several people are going to the satellite at once to be transported to a transporter booth on the surface. Unless I have this wrong, the satellite, because its buffer is full, should try to send the workload on down the line to the next satellite. That should trip the system into full auto-sequencing, which is what we want. It should wake up the rest of the satellites to start beaming down the people trapped in their buffers. Marla nodded excitedly. Yes, absolutely. And a Lunan must transport in because that's what the system expects. Though it's doubtful we'll have a way to get your volunteer back. But don't mention that to anyone, will you? Because we do have a volunteer. I don't mind paying for my crimes if we can get the people out. We'll pick a satellite that was emptied of a few passengers, so there might be room to store my pattern. Leah shook her head with concern. But you'll get out last. You'll be at the end of the queue. Marla leaned over Brahms's console. We've got a plan. Now let's see what else we can do to get more power to those satellites. On the surface of Aluna, Riker directed a work crew of Alunans and Enterprise crew members to carry the transporter booth out of the trees to erect it in a sunny area that had been filled with dry dirt and graded level. Scores of similar crews were working all along the wide strip of land where the transporter booths had been erected over the last few days. Riker and his crew were jogging through the chalky mud to the next location when a shuttlecraft zoomed over their heads and turned around to land in their path. He saw Worf jump out of the craft and head toward him.
You've got a few minutes to wait here, Commander. Then we'll take you to your next site. The first of the plasma bursts is due at any moment. They told me I had better land the shuttle for it, and I was looking for you. My son found the new ruler, so the returning people will have someone to welcome them back to Aluna.
Riker looked around the daunting wilderness. I wonder, will they ever forgive us for what Genesis did?
Someday, Commander.
If we prove worthy. Worf squinted into the grayish, overcast sky, and Riker looked upward just as the heavens were infused with light, like a lightning bolt that's frozen at its peak discharge. Shortly before it ended, a light rain began to fall, and a glorious rainbow arced across the sky for several seconds. That cheered everyone, and the work crew was enthusiastic as they climbed aboard Worf's shuttlecraft. Once they were airborne, Worf asked his pilot for a status report. We've passed 2 booths that are reported to be in good shape, and we're about to land near one that needs repair.
Take us down.
Aye, sir. The shuttlecraft dropped in altitude and swept over majestic trees on the edge of a muddy stream that was trickling through the bottom of the wash. It was silt-ridden now, but the more it rained, the clearer it would flow. In space, the rarefied atmosphere blazed with a light that was almost crystal in its fragility and purity. The great Klingon warships soared swiftly over the string of satellites, expelling bursts of plasma that had built up through countless warp excursions. The Enterprise also followed a row of satellites, venting as much plasma as she had, considering her warp core was gone. Captain Picard still had a skeleton crew, because he was also in a recharging and refitting mode. Almost all the shuttlecraft had launched to aid in the rescue effort, but he didn't want to risk using transporters. The majority of the crew were safer on the ground, although there were disturbing reports of evacuees encountering large, predatory beasts on the new Aluna. LaForge announced from his engineering station on the bridge. 45 minutes left. They're cutting it close. From her co-pilot's seat on the shuttlecraft, Marla turned to Data. We barely have enough time to let everyone out of the buffers. We can't wait any longer. At the controls, Regimal cut the thrusters and let the shuttlecraft drift toward a metal flower suspended in space. An Alunan transporter satellite in very good condition. Data looked up at Marla Carew and Leah Brahms. You have been discussing what to do, so I presume you can do it without our help. Marla jumped to her feet. Yes, we can. I'm going to transport into the satellite, while Dr. Brahms sends the repeat command. Data gave a placid smile of understanding. There is no need to explain. I have very good hearing. Give me a moment to alert the ships and the ground teams. Marla bounded onto the small transporter pad in the rear of the cabin across from the lavatory and waited for Data's command. You are cleared to transport. However, your assistant Complum may be angry, because you are technically still his property. Marla managed a smile. Give him my regrets. Energize. As Marla's body swirled into a tubular rainbow, at the same instant the satellite blinked on, and several of their sensors kicked into high gear, spewing readouts onto all their screens. Leah Brahms thrust her fist upward. It's working! Have we gotten the whole chain working? Regimal relayed the good news. On either side of us, we've got machines coming on. We're sending something to the planet. We'll just have to hope the cargo is in good condition. Worf held his breath as the transporter booth closest to camp, the one in which Curate Molivzon's body had been discovered, blinked on. Riker, Alexander, and Overseer Farlow also stepped to his side and stared at the whirring blue box. A dazed child about 10 years old stepped out, followed by an Illunan woman who gripped the child protectively.
All right! Hooray! Yeah!
Farlow and Alexander rushed forward to lead the small family away from the booth so more survivors could exit. All over the planet, dazed survivors were stepping out of transporter booths and meeting welcoming parties who tried to explain the strange sights and smells. Dr. Crusher and other medical teams were standing by, but the vast majority of evacuees suffered more from shock, grief, and denial, for which there was no medical cure. Although they were alive after having survived a power loss, a fungus, and other dangers, for them it was but an instant since they boarded the transporters in their cities and towns. All those places were gone. In return, they had inherited a bizarre wilderness, which only accentuated their loss. Still, there was great joy among all those Illunans who had come days earlier, either by ship or by the first transporter release. There were also wonders to be seen in this strange world. Amazing growth and destruction, incredible animal life, and lush forests bordered by great plains which were already growing grass. Apparently this grass was a wild grain, which the Illunans knew how to cultivate and harvest. Worf and the Klingons maintained a watch for the moss creatures, but they were never seen again on Illuna. In his hospital bed at Starfleet Medical Center in San Francisco, Worf's adopted son Jeremy sat up as he continued to learn about Illuna's fate from his father. No more moss creatures at all? What did you call them? Alexander sat with a grin on the side of Jeremy's bed and repeated the name. Poklod. And those big slugs, we called them Nujgarg, were very good eating. The Klingons ate so many that they were going extinct even before the anti-Genesis thing went off. Worf shook his head with disapproval. Our crew was getting quite addicted to them. Don't tell Starfleet, but some Klingons are planning a hunt for Nujgarg on one of the other Genesis planets. Rare, dangerous to catch, and quite tasty. They might become a Klingon delicacy. Alexander continued their report to Jeremy. And the Illunans seem to like their new overseer, too. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and he wants to do well. There's a lot of raw materials to rebuild, and food is growing, and the Federation will continue to assist. Worf nodded his head solemnly. We freed 90% of the people trapped in their satellites, which is an extraordinary achievement. I wish the person who made it possible could have seen it. Jeremy understood that his father was referring to the former regent, Marla Carew. But he had another question for his father. And the Enterprise? Worf grunted with amusement. They are still in orbit around Illuna, waiting for Starfleet to bring a new warp core. Alexander laughed and shook his head. But I don't think they mind. It's almost like shore leave at this point, with lots of romantic, isolated places to visit. Geordi LaForge and Leah Brahms looked very happy, and so did Commander Riker and Counselor Troy. Worf took a step closer to the bed and patted Jeremy gently on his shoulder. Now, son, you must rest, so the doctors will release you on schedule. You can rejoin the officer exchange program next week, and I'll do what I can to get you back on the Dog-J. Jeremy held out his fist to the two Klingons. Kapla. The family joined fists and echoed the sentiment. Kapla!
Star Trek: The Next Generation, Genesis Force, was written by John Vornholt and read by Tim Russ. It was abridged for audio by George Truitt. It was recorded at Mark Grau Recording in Los Angeles with editing by Rick Bradley and Dan Mackesy. Post-production and sound design by Gary Fink. Music composed by Richard Emmett, Carl Schurtz, Carl Sharif, Sam McCallie, and Rick Bradley. The associate producer was Kelly Gilday. The director was Bob Walter. Star Trek: The Next Generation, Genesis Force was produced by Karen Perlman. This has been a presentation of Simon & Schuster Audio. Also available from Simon & Schuster Audio, Star Trek: The Next Generation, The Genesis Wave, Books 1 through 3, written by John Vornholt and read by Tim Russ. Star Trek: The Next Generation, Genesis Force is available in hardcover from Pocket Books.